Beautiful. So nice to have the choir in here live this morning. I see tears. I can feel it in my heart as well. I wanted to start this morning by acknowledging that I've only cross-dressed once. Now, I realize for some of you, that's surprising. For others, you feel sorry for me. But what I mean by that is I've only really done it well one time. I was on vacation with my family about 15 years ago. We were staying in a cabin with some other people, and one of them was a medical doctor by day, but on weekends, he was a drag queen. In fact, he became so good at doing the makeup that he became a popular leader of clinics at conferences for drag queens. Now, if you can see me, you know that my face is not exactly easy to transform into a female likeness. Fortunately, this was before I had a beard. The only reason that I'm telling you all this morning is to share the part of that evening when we were out dancing and we came across a blind woman. As you can imagine, there was a lot of buzz about these two men in drag at the club that night. After chatting for a while, the young blind woman asked, "Would it be okay if I touched you since I can't see what everyone else is talking about?" It was kind of unexpected. But what was I going to say? No. I was wearing a long red sequined dress, a stylish wig, and a fabulous set of falsies. She proceeded to slowly run her hands along my hair, all over my face and mouth, and then across all the other major curves. I think in some countries we would have been legally married after that exchange. Now, I know you might be thinking two things. Where was his wife? And how's he going to turn this into a message about Christopher Columbus and Indigenous Peoples Day? All right. First of all, my wife was with me. In fact, she was the instigator of this whole thing. I wouldn't have probably done it without her pleading and encouragement. The message I want to share on this complicated weekend, it's been Columbus Day in this country for a long time. It's now becoming known more and more as Indigenous Peoples Day. Even the President of the United States said yesterday that he deems this day, this weekend, Indigenous Peoples Weekend, while also maintaining the Columbus Day moniker as well. But what I want to talk about on this complicated weekend is intimacy. Intimacy. Because Columbus and colonialism are all about taking and separating and owning. Whereas most indigenous cultures focus more on connection and belonging. The shift from celebrating Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day is a change from separation to unity, from taking to belonging. It's an invitation to intimacy. In 2019, I spoke on this weekend about why a person like me, who has an Italian-American heritage, would forsake Columbus Day and promote Indigenous Peoples Day in its place. In that message, I talked about the challenges of being border walkers between cultures. If you're a part of All Souls and or any other inclusive community like All Souls, we are walking on the borders of culture and religion. That message was about finding ways to affirm our own backgrounds and histories while also standing in solidarity with others who've been harmed by those same backgrounds and histories. It's complicated and important work. Today, however, I want us to, during this holiday weekend, to look at a core spiritual reason for making the shift from Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. It's about finding intimacy with all things. Now, our theme this month at All Souls is oneness. It's the idea that we are all a part of an interdependent web of all existence. We are one with everything and everyone at the most fundamental level. We know this from science, and we know this from many religions and spiritualities. But in a world full of division, how can we experience our fundamental intimacy with all things? In a world full of division and domination, how can we feel our intimacy with all things? I had to learn the hard way. When I was growing up, many of my closest friends and neighbors were working class Italian and Irish. I'm not proud to admit this, but back then, I knew how to say the N-word in about 5 languages. We had at least a half dozen words that meant gay, and when we used them, it was never meant as a compliment. Jews, Asians, Polish, we had a put down for everyone. Now, when I say that, among the people I went to school with, you needed to know how to defend your words with your fists. That was just part of growing up. And when you were talking to other people in this community, you were usually saying some words that were derogatory of someone, and they were saying some back to you. And things often broke out into a fight, and it was not a pretty thing. I hated to fight, but it was a regular part of growing up for me and probably for some of you. Let's just say I wasn't born with this misshapen nose. And if my broad shoulders or my protruding forehead didn't give me away that night years ago when I wore that dazzling dress, my big banged up nose probably did. All this ethnically tinged physical and verbal violence of my growing up years are vestiges of colonialism. They're part of the drive for dominance. In fact, I was lucky that night when I got to experience dressing in drag. We didn't get chased or taunted or beat up like so many do and have been for a long time. It's all part of the long legacy of domination, patriarchy, and transphobia that has grown out of European colonialism of this continent. Now, what if, besides just shifting our holiday from Columbus to indigenous peoples, we would shift our culture from taking from each other to belonging to each other? The best passage on belonging to each other in the Christian scriptures is 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 13 through 27, which read, "You are one body in the Spirit, whether Jews or Greeks, slave or free. Now the body is not made up of one part, but of many." He's talking about the body of existence. If the foot should say, "Because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body," it would not, for that reason, cease to be part of the body. And if the ear should say, "Because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body," it would not, for that reason, cease to be part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing come from? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? But in fact, God has arranged the parts in the body, every one of them, just as God wanted them to be. If they were all one part, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, but one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, "I don't need you," and the head cannot say to the feet, "I don't need you." On the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And the parts that we think are less honorable, we treat with special honor. God has combined the members of the body and has given greater honor to the parts that lacked it, so that there should be no division in the body, but that its parts should have equal concern for each other. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. Now you are the body of God, and each one of you is part of it. How can people read that on Sunday and then go persecute each other for the rest of the week? One reason is that in Western cultures, and Western religion, we've created a division or a separation between what's considered sacred and what's considered secular. I want to contrast that with the spirituality of many of the native peoples of this land. Now, keep in mind that today, they say there are 574 recognized Native American tribes. So it's important to understand that of all these hundreds of different tribes, they each have different cultures and different spiritualities. So there are, of course, certain commonalities, but I think too often we jump to generalizing, and I don't think that's helpful. So I want to encourage all of us to take time to read and learn about different Native American cultures and religions and spiritualities from the people who live them and practice them in their daily lives. What I can say is that most Native American spirituality does not separate the spiritual from the secular, like Western religions have come to do. The spiritual or the supernatural world is the same thing as the real world. They're one and the same. there's a strong sense of connection, of oneness. One of the most well-known examples is among the Lakota Sioux. They have a phrase, mitakuyu oyeyasan. I'm not sure I pronounced that right, so I apologize for that. But it means all are related, or all beings are relatives of each other. So if we agree that we want to make this shift from separation to unity, from taking from to belonging to each other, where do we begin? I mean, how do we start? Well, I think it starts with our most personal relationships, our most intimate relationships. If we're related to all, then we better learn how to get along with the people who are closest to us. Someone who has become one of my favorite teachers on the topic of intimacy is a man named Terry Real. You might have heard of him. He wrote an audiobook, or spoke an audiobook, I think it is. It's titled Fierce Intimacy. And in it, Terry Real explains that in most of our relationships, he's talking about our intimate relationships, we too often come from either grandiosity or from shame. In other words, we can either think we're superior to our partner or significant others, or we can think we're inferior to them. We're not always conscious of this, but we live in a one-up or one-down consciousness a lot of the time. Now, you might think about your significant other. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Or she just hasn't had enough experience to really understand. Or he always thinks too negatively, or too small, or too unpractically. Or she's too sensitive, or too self-conscious, or too selfish. There are thousands of ways that we can see the other person in our lives that inflates our sense of ourselves and deflates the other person. However we do it, it's a way of separating ourselves. We can distance ourselves from each other so easily. Now, some of us tend the other way, towards shame or feeling less than others. We have 1,000 ways to put ourselves down. We compare how we feel with how we see others doing. Everyone else seems so together on the outside, and we compare that with how messed up we feel on the inside. Terry Real says that these are two sides of the same coin. One up, one down. It's the same thing. It's a way of separating ourselves from the person who's before us so we don't have to come close. You are neither better nor worse than anybody else. I'm going to say that again. You are neither better nor worse than anybody else. When you accept that, you're on your way to intimacy. As long as you put yourself above or below someone else, you're living in separation. So here's what I want you to do during this month where we're focused on oneness and unity. I want to invite you to keep a journal and log when you're feeling one up or one down. And you'll probably feel both at different times, but you probably have one that is your main way of coping. We all do it. I'm a minister. I share my opinions with people for a living. You can imagine when I'm not grounded in my own self and my own essence and my own truth, I go to one up. I can think I'm smarter than, better than my wife or anybody else. And it is an easy way and a really destructive way that I draw distance and miss out on relationships and closeness. So pay attention to how you avoid intimacy. What's your strategy? What's your coping mechanism? And then, if you want to get extra credit for those in the advanced placement program, when you're feeling above someone, visualize bringing that person up to your level. Hey, they're not so bad. I'm going to just bring them up. Or, if you're feeling below them, dealing with some shame or insecurity, I want you to visualize pulling them down to earth with you. They put their pants on one leg at a time, just like you. So here's the real trick, though, to follow. If you're feeling either one up or one down, shut the heck up. I'm serious. Pause. Walk away if you have to until you can right-size yourself and the other person. Because if you're in that place of feeling one down or one up, you're only going to create harm and separation and possibly destruction within your relationship. So it's real easy. Just shut up. Take a pause. Say, let me start over. And if you can't right-size yourself or the other person, walk away, take a break, and start over. Now, like all ministers, I got a couple colleagues in the pews today. The question is, how are you going to remember this message? When you go home or wherever, or go to work, and someone asks you, what was the sermon about today? First, you could say, well, the minister told a story of when he dressed up as a woman. Really? What was the point of that? Well, the topic was intimacy. He explained how this woman who was blind asked if she could see what he was wearing with her hands. When she did, he felt a nice connection, different from any other connection he'd ever felt with somebody that he'd just met before. It seemed that the experience that he was describing was while both being a man dressing as a woman, as well as this interaction with a blind person, took him outside of his comfort zone. He was moved. He realized how people with disabilities and people with differences in gender identities are often seen as separate or even as less than. His point was that separation is harmful. And so he gave us tools to right-size ourselves. The hope is that we don't just change the holiday from Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day, but that we change our society and our way of being from one of taking from each other to one of belonging to each other. And when your friend says, wow, I always thought that church was kind of boring, but your church sounds kind of different. You might reply, well, our senior minister can be quite a drag. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. For 100 years, All Souls in Tulsa has been a beacon of this free faith. We offer our services and programs freely online for all those who are interested. You can help us to do this by making a one-time gift today or a reoccurring pledge. We really appreciate you joining us and being a part of helping us make All Souls in Tulsa what it is. Thank you.